Going live. Good evening and welcome to all the teachers in today's Samwad session. The topic for today's Samwad session would be the role of the Constitution in shaping good citizens. So, as educators, we understand the profound impact that a well-structured constitution can have in molding responsible and ethical citizens, right? So let's explore how the Constitution plays a pivotal role in shaping the character and values of individuals within our society. Before going ahead, I would quickly take you through what our program actually is and introduce you to Gurushala, which is an initiative of Industars Limited and Vodafone Idea Foundation. And the program is implemented by Pratham Education Foundation. Also, there are some things to note, which is to make notes and any question, any ideas if you have during the session, do remember to make notes of them. Type your questions, answer, and any ideas in the comment section in either English or in Hindi. Also, remember to sign up on Gurushala for regular updates on trainings and webinars and such competitions, right? Just to make sure, you will also be receiving a certificate of participation at the end of the session, and an attendance form will be shared to you via the comment section. All the participants submitting the form will receive a certificate of participation via their mail. Right. So now that we'll move ahead with our session, I encourage all the teachers to actively participate in this discussion, share your insights and experiences and thoughts on how we as educators can impart a deeper understanding of constitutional values to our students. We have a very special guest here today with us who will be taking us through the discussion of how the Constitution helps in shaping the citizens of our country. I welcome Mr. Swapnil Tripathi, who is a Gopal Subramaniam scholar and a DPhil candidate at the University of Oxford. Mr. Swapnil, yes, please, over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. A very good evening to all of you. Okay, I think the slides will come in a bit. A very good evening to all of you. First of all, I'm very delighted to be speaking to an audience that comprises largely of teachers who, for me, are no less than, their role is no less than God themselves because the role they play in the life of a child. And as they say, they make or break a child. And I believe behind every successful human being is a teacher who believed in her or him when even their own parents didn't. So it's my absolutely honor today to be speaking to all of you. And I cannot help but remember my own teachers and principal, when for everything they did. Now, when I received the invitation from Pratham and Gurushala, I was very happy. I mean, I had, of course, heard of the incredible work the organization has been doing, but I had no idea of the depth and breadth of their work and how the organization has played an instrumental role in improving primary education in India. And it is truly commendable. During my preliminary reading about the organization, I came across a TED talk by Rukmini Banerjee ma'am, who was the CEO of the organization, and she had remarked, and I quote, "A lot of academic work complicates things. The world is a complicated place, and a comprehensive scheme of things gets in the way of normal people wanting to do things that can take the world forward." Now, the crux of her statement was that often in our attempt, and I include my community in our attempt to academize things, we tend to make things complex and dissuade people who do not have an academic background from contributing. And the legal profession and the academia is guilty of this as well. And law and the constitution are perceived as the sole domain of judges and lawyers and politicians and academicians. How often have we heard that the constitution is too long, it's complex, and why is there a need to know what it says? It is indeed long. It's the longest constitution in the world with over 395 articles, 12 schedules, and ranges over 400 PDF pages. Uh, However, the solution lies not in ignoring the text of the Constitution, but in creating mechanisms that make the Constitution accessible for the citizens. Now, the Constitution is important because it governs every aspect of your life. Let me give you a contextual example. So, for instance, what a teacher says in class, what they eat in the staff room, their movement from one classroom to another, their treatment by the principal, their behavior towards children, marking of papers, the holidays they claimed. The genesis of all these acts is in the Constitution. So, for instance, speaking in class concerns your fundamental right to speech. Eating in the staff room concerns your right to liberty. Movement from one classroom to another concerns your freedom of movement. Treatment by a principal concerns your right to dignity, and behavior towards children concerns the children's right to dignity. But to be able to assert these rights and, more importantly, know that they exist in the first place, an understanding of the Constitution is very important. And in fact, ignoring the Constitution can have very severe consequences in the first place. I remember reading a news article in the year 2018 when a poor vegetable vendor was arrested for using the national flag as a roof on the top of his house, of his dilapidated house. Now, his action was technically against the law because you're supposed to not commit acts that can, disrespect or dishonor the national flag. But when the police came to arrest him, he pleaded ignorance of the law. He said, I didn't know this was the law in the first place. This news was my first encounter with the complexity of our laws and the lack of awareness amongst people about it. The second encounter was when I was reading about the great Nani Palkhiwala, who's on the screen, who was the famous lawyer who defended the rights of citizens before the courts when the national emergency was imposed in the years 1975 to 1977. Now, Mr. Palkhiwala was known to conduct meetings where he would explain the union budget to the masses in simple language. And once he was asked that what is the motivation behind these budgets, and he had said that I will consider these meetings a success when that unknown little man who is interested in it comes to know of it and is able to attend it. And who knows, he may become the Prime Minister of India someday. And as luck would have it, one of them actually did. At a public meeting in January 1997, the then Prime Minister Sri H.D. Devegowda stopped his speech and saw Palkhiwala seated in the audience. And he said, Sir, I used to be a listener of your speeches in Bangalore, and I respect you. Now, these encounters pushed me to do my bit in simplifying the law and making it engaging. And to that effect, I founded my blog, The Basic Structure, wherein I attempt to make constitutional law engaging for both lawyers and non lawyers alike. And the blog has a special section which you can see on the screen called Law Aajkal, where what I do is I use cinema to explain provisions of the law. So, for instance, the perennial movie on Set Max, Suryavansham, is used to explain the law on how the law on arrest of women is concerned. Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is used to explain the law on national anthem because it has a scene where the national anthem is sung at Krish's annual function. Now, the blog has received a lot of love. It has been read by over viewers from 140 countries, has amassed over 200,000 views. However, my proudest feat is the fact that the readership of the blog comprises of readers from a diverse set. So, for instance, my school teachers read it, security personnel, civil servants, accountants, business persons, and other diverse population. And the motto is to take the Constitution to the people and bust this myth that the Constitution is a document that only concerns the legal community. After all, if you read the Constitution, the first substantive phrase is we the people. And it will be a disservice to the makers of our Constitution if the very people for whom it is created do not engage with the document in the first place. Now, I have been invited to speak on the auspicious occasion of the National Voters' Day, and the theme is the role of the Constitution in shaping good citizens. I believe the theme is appropriate also because we are celebrating 75 years of India's Constitution this week. And in tune with the spirit of my writing, I will take you through the making of our Constitution, its text, and highlight the important values they hold for a citizen. Now, coming to the first bit, which is the making of our Constitution and the lessons it holds for a citizen. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chairman of the drafting committee which drafted our Constitution, on 26th November 1949, had given his famous concluding speech in the Assembly. And Dr. Ambedkar had remarked that however good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad because those who are called to work on it happen to be a bad lot. And however bad a constitution might be, it may turn out to be a good constitution if those who are called to work on it happen to be a good lot. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the president of the Constituent Assembly, also expressed similar emotions when he said that, after all, a constitution is like a machine, which is a lifeless thing, and it acquires life because of the men who control and operate it. Now, I absolutely concur with these remarks that ultimately it is the people who are implementing the constitution which make it great. The greatness of a constitution is proportional to the people who are implementing it. However, that should not take us away from the inherent greatness of the document itself, of our Indian constitution, and the process of its creation. The constitution was a product of years of freedom struggle and the resolve of our freedom fighters that India will create its own law and not be governed by law made by foreigners. Now, there were many stalwarts who spearheaded the effort to create our own constitution, and let me recall just three here. First is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, no matter which end of the political spectrum we fall on, one cannot ignore the role that was played by Nehruji. Let me paint you a picture. There is a young boy who's born with a silver spoon, studied in the best institutions in the world, Harrow and Cambridge, who had all the luxuries in the world, decides to disobey his father, rejects his abundant wealth, and dons khadi instead of the silk and muslin his parents are giving him. And the only reason for this motive, the only reason behind his motivation is the hope of an independent India. Second, Sardar Patel, a hardworking and successful lawyer, educated in London, who is known for wearing European suits and playing bridge in the club. He gives up his wealth because he was moved by Gandhiji's call to freedom or to national service. Third, Dr. Ambedkar, a Dalit, whose life is the opposite of the privilege Nehruji received. Ambedkar faced discrimination at every step of his life. He was not allowed to sit in classes. He was supposed to not drink water from the common tap, refused accommodation, all because he belonged to a untouchable community. Despite the difference in their fortune and privilege, the three have something in common, which is the idea to give India its own constitution. The spirit which guided them was that the nation comes first and personal gains are secondary. Imagine what would have happened if Nehru decided to follow his father's footstep and become a lawyer. If Sardar Patel continued his illustrious practice and Ambedkar settled in the US where he got his doctorate, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. So, point number one, for an ideal citizen, it is very important that your nation always comes first and personal goals are secondary. The second, let's look at the composition of the assembly in the first place. The assembly consisted of representatives from all parts of the country, and it was truly an inclusive body because it contained not just lawyers and judges, but also people from other professions, which shows us that the constitution is not supposed to be a document only for the lawyers because it was not framed by lawyers alone. It was framed by people who were from all walks of life. And it is essential that these varied perspectives of people from different walks of life are highlighted so that better laws can be framed. However, my favorite aspect about this body was the diversity and tolerance it represented. Now, it is a known fact that the then Congress, the Congress was the single largest party at the time, and it could have virtually created the constitution it wanted, given how popular Sardar Patel, Jawaharlal Nehru, and others were. However, despite its numerical majority, its leaders decided to include in the assembly members who were ideologically differed from the party. Now, they did not let politics get in the way of nation building. So, for instance, Dr. Ambedkar's disagreement with Gandhiji and the Congress were known, but he was still nominated to the assembly, and because he was the first best person for the job. It also sent a strong message at the time because casteism was prevalent in India very rampantly. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar lost the first election to the assembly, but Gandhiji ensured that he was nominated from a different seat since his presence was essential. Now, while you may know Dr. Ambedkar, you might not know the other person on the screen. The other person is a lady called Dakshayani Velayudhan, who was the first Dalit woman member of the assembly. And she was elected despite her staunch opposition of the Congress. So there was a senior leader in the Congress called C.K. Rajgopalachari. And Dakshayani had called him a clever Brahmin opportunist 6 months before her election. And on an earlier occasion had written that Congress is the least fitted party to rule over India on a democratic basis. And a Congress government will be a government of caste Hindus and the capitalist. People wrote letters to Nehru and Patel to stall her appointment. And however, they did not listen. And once again, the nation came first and politics came later. So we must remember these episodes to remind us that just because a citizen has a different viewpoint from us on what the nation needs does not mean we disrespect him or her or don't hear them out. Multiplicity of views is important and should be encouraged. In fact, the same holds true in a classroom as well. Just because a student sings a different tune from others doesn't mean he or she is wrong. Third, the assembly was the epitome of debate and discussion, which discussed every provision of the Constitution and allowed everyone a chance to speak. It is a model that must be replicated in our lives as well, wherein we allow everyone a chance to speak. This is essentially true for our classroom, wherein often students are scared to share their thoughts because of the fear that other students might judge them or a teacher might not agree with them. In fact, I remember when I was in school and then law school, seniors used to advise us to only write those answers which the teacher or the professor agrees with. And the justification was that it will get you good marks. Or the strategy might get me good marks, but it will destroy the critical thinking ability of a child. As ideal citizens, we must question things around us, and the building blocks for it can only be laid in the classroom. Now, given our freedom history, let's come to the text of the Constitution. Like I mentioned before, often the text of the Constitution dissuades the citizens from reading it. However, if reading the text seemed laborious, a comprehensive reading of the preamble should suffice. Now, the picture you see on the screen of the preamble is a one page preamble, is like a one page primer of the Constitution, and it lists out its aspirations and goals. In fact, the preamble is based on the objective resolution introduced by the Prime Minister on 13th December 1946, which lists its guiding principles, which were to inform the making of the Constitution. Now, please note, every word of the preamble is backed by the text of the Constitution. Hence, it would not be incorrect to say that a thorough understanding of the preamble is a thorough understanding of the Constitution. In fact, if one adopts the principles of the preamble in our life, they can all be dutiful citizens. Its understanding is also essential, not just for adults, but also children, and its philosophy should be indoctrinated in their mind. So, let me take you through the preamble. The first words of the preamble, like I was mentioning before, are "We the people of India." The phrase "people of India" is very important, as it signifies that the Constitution has been created by the people, for the people, and is of the people. And it importantly signals a break from our colonial past, is a sign of our freedom, and the fact that we are masters of our own fate. Now, when the freedom fighters decided that India would draft its constitution, there were many detractors and imperialists who had deemed Indians unfit for governing themselves. But our founding figures were clear in their vision. They wanted Purn Swaraj, that is, complete independence, including being governed by the laws framed by the people. But this was shocking to many, as many countries around us were governed by constitutions that were drafted by their colonial masters. You might not know the Japanese constitution, which governed Japan, was actually drafted by Americans and not the natives. And India could have adopted that. The British did want it to adopt that, but our founding fathers were very clear that this is not an approach we need. We need to make our own laws. The second word is the people, which was inclusive of every citizen and did not discriminate on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or color. Now, this was a path breaking move because some countries had, although used the phrase "we the people," they only included a certain section of the population. So, for instance, if you read the text of the American Constitution that's on your screen, you will see it has the same first word as us. It also reads "we the people." But at the time the US Constitution was created, it only granted protection to white men, since women had no right to vote and African Americans were not considered equal citizens. Interestingly, African Americans were considered three-fifths citizens as per the Constitution to account their status as property because they could be bought and sold in the market. Hence, the phrase "we the people" did not include the entire population for America, but that was not the case for India. The Constitution was to apply to men and women belonging to all strata of the society. And we must remember that the protection of law governs everyone, irrespective of their class, caste, religion, or sex. The protection of the Constitution is never taken away from the citizen, be it an adult or a child, in their private home or in a public institution like a school. In fact, the Constitution is a one of a kind because there is a provision that empowers a citizen to directly approach the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, if they feel their fundamental rights are violated. This is an important bit about the Constitution that should be remembered. The second phrase is "having solemnly resolved." Now, you might think that this is just a innocuous and routine phrase that they've just retained. However, it holds immense value. Our freedom fighters had, after years of blood, sweat, and tears, achieved independence and framed this constitution. It was an act of firm resolution that Indians would be free from imperial rule. This phrase reminds us that we should never surrender this prized freedom to anyone and continue fighting for it. Our society teaches and expects us to be compliant with the rules and never question them. Even in our schools and home, when a child asks too many questions, we call her or him a troublemaker. And the quiet ones are considered as the ideal students. I believe this is in contrast to what the Constitution expects of its citizens. It expects them to question and respectfully assert their independence. This assertiveness should be celebrated and not curbed, because for an inquisitive citizen is an informed citizen, for an inquisitive and one that cannot be fooled. A child that only follows instructions cannot lead in the future. And this nation doesn't need followers, it needs leaders who change the status quo for a better future. And that's one thing that should specifically be remembered in a classroom setup. The second words are to constitute India into a sovereign and socialist nation. Now, sovereignty ensures that people of India are sovereign and no one is above them. Our entire constitution is designed in a manner that people are at its center. And in no way should we forget the special role that we play, that it is the citizens that are supreme and not the leaders who consider themselves supreme. Now comes the most contested word in the preamble in today's day and age, which is secular. Now, one of the most hotly debated phrases is secularism. And if understood correctly, it simply means that our government cannot pick sides and favor one religion over the other, period. It has to be neutral and allow citizens to celebrate their religion without any interference. This policy should also be adopted by institutions as well, wherein they don't undertake policies which favor one community or religion whatsoever. I'm reminded of a quote by Dr. Radhakrishnan, who is a former president of India, and interestingly, an alumni of Oxford. And he was a professor here. And on secularism, he had remarked that you can see the quote on the screen, that we hold that not one religion should be given preferential status or unique distinction. No group of citizens shall allocate to itself rights and privileges that it denies to others. No person should suffer from any form of disability or discrimination because of his religion, but all alike should be free to share the fullest degree in the common life. Secularism is defined in accordance with the ancient religious tradition of India, which is something that should be applicable everywhere else. The screen is a bit blurry, but I'll make up for it by reading. And so the next two words that you will see are democratic republic. Now, this word democracy is very important. In the famous words of Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address, which you would have heard of, democracy means the government by the people, for the people, and of the people. So the people choose their representative by exercising their votes. You might be a king, you might come from an elite family, you might be a farmer, you might be a tea seller. You all have an equal chance to be a representative. And your fate rests in the hands of the people. Unlike a king, the title of a representative is not hereditary. They need to be periodically elected. Now, when India attained independence, India could have adopted three paths. First, a dictatorship, wherein the prime minister and his cabinet rule as dictators for a few years before the nation can stand on its feet. A practice followed in a lot of other Asian countries, so India could have adopted it. Second, unlimited democracy, which is followed in the West, wherein right to vote in the early elections were limited to those who owned property. The idea was that uneducated and poor were incapable of assessing what is good for them. Due to these restrictions, usually the working class and women were excluded from adult franchise. The third option was complete democracy, wherein everyone, irrespective of their status, had a right to vote. Now, our framers chose complete democracy, which was a very risky decision at that time and could have failed. In fact, in the Constituent Assembly, President Rajendra Prasad had termed it an experiment, but he showed faith in India's electorate, which, even though was largely illiterate, in his opinions, possessed intelligence and common sense. However, imagine the scenario of the time, wherein the government was getting a country of 176 million people, out of which 85% were illiterate and could not read and write, ready to vote. When in 1951, the government called for elections, the detractors termed it an exercise bound to fail. A Madras editor I remember had written that it was the biggest gamble in the history. And he wrote that a very large majority will exercise votes for the first time. Not many know what the vote is, who they should vote for, and why they should vote. No wonder the whole adventure is rated as the biggest gamble in history. Similarly, an erstwhile Maharaja had told his American guests, and you see that quote on the screen, that any constitution that sanctions universal adult franchise in a land of illiterates is crazy. Another weekly predicted that Nehru would live to confess the failure of a universal franchise in India. However, the government was ably assisted by Chief Election Commissioner Sukumar Sen, someone whose picture you saw on the screen. who is an unsung hero of the Indian democracy. His team not only ensured that 176 million Indians were identified, named, and registered, but also, given their illiteracy, pictorial party symbols were created, which allowed them to identify who to vote because they could not read the name, unlike in other countries. The symbols were very interesting. They were a pair of bullocks, a hut, an elephant, a diya, and the election was a success. And the entire process made the American ambassador to India change his views on elections. And he remarked that literacy was no longer a test of intelligence. And Asia did not need a series of Ataturks before they would be ready for democracy. I believe in the 21st century today, we often forget the rich history of our democracy and why India's decision to become one was a novel exception. Everyone thought we would fail, but democracy succeeded in India. It is our foremost duty as citizens to exercise this vote very, very carefully. In fact, it has been earned with a lot of sacrifice, and it is our responsibility to those who thought that democracy will not survive in India. It is a democratic process that has enabled men and women from all walks of life to lead the country and represent us. We've had rooted prime ministers like Lal Bahadur Shastri, who came from abject poverty and rose to become the prime minister. Even our incumbent Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, whose journey to the top is incredibly inspiring and a testament to the success of our democracy. If we did not have democracy, we would not have had people from the ground coming up and becoming our Prime Minister. I'm reminded of a scene from a recent movie, Jawan, and I already mentioned I do law ajkal, which aptly summarizes the duty of a citizen in a democracy. Now, in a scene of the movie, Shah Rukh Khan passionately remarks that हर जगह हर समय कितने सवाल पूछते हो सिवाय एक चीज के अपनी सरकार चुनते वक्त 5 घंटा चलने वाली मस्कीटो कॉइल के लिए कितना सवाल करते हो पर 5 साल तक अपनी सरकार चुनते वक्त एक सवाल नहीं करते डर पैसा जायदाद धर्म के बजाय जो आपसे वोट मांगने आए आप उससे सवाल पूछो पूछो कि अगले 5 साल तक तुम मेरे लिए क्या करोगे मेरे बच्चों की शिक्षा के लिए क्या करोगे मुझे नौकरी दिलाने के लिए क्या करोगे मैं अगर बीमार पड़ गया तो मेरे परिवार के लिए क्या करोगे अगले 5 साल तक तुम मेरे देश को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए क्या करोगे पूछो उनसे which roughly translates to that instead of voting for fear money caste religion or community question those who come to ask you for your vote ask them what will you do for in the coming years what will you do for my family for their treatment how will I find employment and how will you advance my country. This is exactly what was expected by President Rajendra Prasad when he remarked that my Indians are capable of taking measures of their own interest and also of interests of the country at large, if things are explained to them. We must keep this in mind when we go out to vote and should never do something that will transform our beloved, cherished democracy into an autocracy or a dictatorship. The next bit is and to secure to all citizens justice, social, economic, and political. So social justice means ensuring that there is no privileged class in the society and no one is denied access to any public facilities or institutions on grounds of their caste, color, race, or gender. An independent India should not have a repeat of the experience Dr. Ambedkar went through, and that is what our assembly had hoped. Economic justice means that there should be no discrimination on the basis of income, especially between men and women. Women should not be paid less money than a man for the same labor that they are putting in. As a citizen, we have to ensure that our institutions do not undertake practices that are against economic justice. And it manifests in very little ways. So I'm reminded of a Supreme Court case where one of the airlines had a policy that they would just not hire women. And their justification was that if we hire women, they will eventually get married and they will undergo pregnancy and they will claim marital leave. So they did not, they created a policy which had a condition that you will not get pregnant on the job. This violates the economic justice that is expected of our constitution, that you account for everything. You don't discriminate on the basis of income and gender. The third being political justice. Now, what political justice means is that everyone will have an equal chance to participate in the politics of the country and building of its institutions, be it an election for a class monitor or the election of the prime minister of the country. Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. An often quoted provision in our constitution is Article 19, which guarantees the right to freedom of speech and expression. Now, barring a few exceptions, every citizen has a right and should definitely exercise it. We live in a democracy, hence, we must exercise that right and speak up in both public and private spaces. Now, the threshold of free speech that was envisaged in our constitution is very wide, and we should ensure that that ideal is upheld. It is our duty to ensure that there is no chilling effect in the society, which effectively means that people are fearful to speak their minds because of danger of consequences. And to quote philosopher and historian Voltaire, we may disagree with what you say, but we defend to death the right to say so. So you might not agree with what I'm saying, but you will defend the fact that I have a right to say it in the first place. And we must ensure that even difficult truths are uttered and our tolerance is high. The solution is not to shut people, the solution is to improve our tolerance. Now, remember, if there is no free speech, there was no free speech and liberty. Movements against abhorrent practices would never have risen. The British curbed and banned speeches critical of their regime, and we Indians fought vehemently against it. And it is our civic and constitutional duty to ensure that we don't return to a police state again. The next being equality of status and opportunity, which I feel is a provision which we deal with on an everyday basis in our lives. One of the facets of our constitution which makes it path breaking is equality. Now, our constitution guarantees both equality of status and opportunity, which means no one's status is above the other and everyone has the same opportunity. However, the constitution also ensures that this equality is not a mere lip service. We follow substantive equality and not formal equality. Now, let me give you an example. You can see a picture of Aesop's fable on the screen, and there's also a story in Panchatantra which mentions it, wherein once a fox invites a crane, his friend, for a meal, and the fox serves the crane a soup in a plate. Now, anybody who's seen the crane knows crane has a long beak, so of course it can't eat from the plate. So the crane goes, he leaves hungry, and he's very upset. Thereafter, the crane invites the fox for a meal and serves him soup in a surahi. And surahi has a long neck. And of course, the fox mouth cannot go in the surahi. So the fox, of course, can't eat again, and he again leaves hungry. So the story begs a question. The question is, did the fox and the crane treat each other fairly? Now, some of you might say, of course they did, because they served the food in the same plate as the one they ate in. So there is no discrimination. And this would be called formal equality, wherein you are treating two people as equal without any discrimination. However, if we analyze deeply, we realize that the use of the same vessel automatically excluded the guest due to their special characteristic: long beak for the crane and the mouth of the fox. To ensure that the guest was treated fairly and equally, each of them should have served the soup in a vessel suited to their personal characteristics. So, for the crane, it should have been a surahi, and for the fox, it should have been a plate. This is substantive equality, which considers special characteristics to account and ensure equality. And it is the Indian constitution which adopts the latter, wherein it accounts for conditions of certain communities and certain facilities are extended to them. Let me give you another example, which is very contextual to India. Let's say 5 years ago, there was a man called Sham who bought two horses. One was Ashva and the other was Raghu. Now, Ashva was trained by a skilled rider. He was fed the best food, he was given a comfortable stay, and he grew into a formidable stallion. Ashva participated in numerous races. He was a full racer. Raghu, on the other hand, was barely given food, kept in a stable with filth and flies. He was never allowed to participate in a race. He was never trained. And as a result, he grew to be feeble and weak. However, 5 years later, Sham decides that I need to enforce equality in my stable. So he says that now both Ashwin and Raghu will participate in a race together. Now, can you guess who would win? The answer is fairly clear: Ashwin, who is the horse kept in better conditions. Although here, the competition is formally fair, as both of them are getting a chance to compete in a race, the reality in which Raghu is lived has been ignored. The same argument applies for communities that were discriminated for centuries in India. The constitution does not make the mistake which Sham committed, and it takes into account years of discrimination and provides for measures that will atone and hopefully undo the effects of discrimination and ensure a fair competition. Even in our lives, we must apply this principle. If someone's circumstances put them at a disadvantage. Rather than exploiting their situation, we must create infrastructure to support them and give them a fair chance. Avenues must be created to ensure reasonable accommodation for students with special needs. And it could be language support, it could be infrastructural support, could be emotional support. Only then will we ensure that there is real equality and not mere lip service. The differences which our society has should be accounted for rather than being mocked or efforts being made to assimilate them into our idea of equality. And one of my favorite movies of all time is Tare Zameen Par. And I think we all need to remember that it's important to be a Ram Shankar Nikum to Ishan Avasthi, rather than his other teachers who always mocked him rather than understanding what his special needs were. Uh, the next bit talks about the remaining phrase of the Constitution is, and to promote amongst all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. Most importantly, we must remember that we citizens share brotherhood amongst each other and stay united and are not divided. Our actions should ensure that we do not belittle an individual and violate his dignity. The Constitution protects the dignity of the citizens by prohibiting untouchability, forced labor, employment of children in hazardous factories, and guaranteeing to everyone the right to life and dignity. All of us have a moral obligation to fulfill this principle. Now, the Constitution has a lot of lofty ideals, which I've been speaking about for the last 35 minutes. However, you might ask a question that have we achieved these ideals? And if not, how do we achieve this? And I might sound like a pessimist here when I say it. We have not achieved these ideals. These are very lofty ideals that our today's society has not achieved, and there is a lot left to do. Now, some of you may argue that our literacy rate has gone up, and since most of us are educated, we are constitutionalists because education translates to an improved society. To an extent, it does. However, literacy alone does not make an individual a better citizen. Let me tell you a story. There is a meritorious individual who gets a full scholarship, is sent to Columbia University for his higher studies. He completes his doctorate from Columbia, thereafter does a second PhD from the London School of Economics, and also enrolls as a lawyer in the UK. When he comes back to India, he gets a job in a university. However, at the university, his educated colleagues refuse to drink water from the same jug as him. Files are thrown at him from a distance so that nobody gets to touch him. Now, this might be, and the reason for his discrimination is his caste. This might be the story of Dr. Ambedkar, but casteism is a reality even today. There are many colleagues even today who refuse to drink water from the same jug, who force children to perform menial work, who inflict violence on them, who treat them without dignity, only because they belong to a particular caste or religion, which shows clearly that education is not enough. And the statistics, the three news articles you see on your screen are just three of the thousands which happen on an everyday basis. Let's not go far. Let me tell you an incident about a law school in India which I had read somewhere. Now, the national law universities are the equivalent of IITs for pursuing a law degree. That's the prestige they carry. I've studied at one myself. Now, they are the foremost institutions of excellence, and one gets an admission there after clearing the common law admission test. Now, being a government exam, of course, some seats are reserved as well. During the interaction with new students, often seniors ask the CLAT rank of the new joinees. I mean, to everyone, it might seem like an innocuous question. That is, you're just asking where you come from and what your rank is. However, it is often asked to identify the caste of the joinee, which will be indicated by the rank. So, the life of a lawyer often begins with discrimination. And these are arguably the top 1% of educated citizens in India. So, we can see that education alone is not important. So, how do we top that education? Along with the education, a change in mindset is very important. And imbibing the values of the constitution that we've been talking about to ensure is very important, because only then can we ensure that justice, equality, liberty, fraternity for all are upheld. And we have to ensure that no child undergoes humiliation again, neither in our schools, neither in our houses, neither in our society. And I strongly believe if you follow the principles that are there in the preamble, none of that will actually follow. To conclude, I recently watched this movie called 12th Fail, wherein Vikrant Massey's character in his IS interview says that if people are truly educated, they will be fooled less. It also reminded me of a quote from Nani Palkhiwala, who had said that literacy is not enough. It is good to have a population which is able to read, but infinitely better to have people able to distinguish what is worth reading. So I believe true education should start from an understanding of the Constitution, and only then can abhorrent practices around us be rooted out. An informed citizenry can assert its right and compel the government into making better laws and policies. The task is tough, but tougher battles must be fought to create a better society. As teachers, you can start by generating interest in the minds of students about their constitution, about their history. There are so many inspiring stories from the vaults of our history, and that should be told. However, to discover these stories, we will have to move beyond prescribed curriculum. And today's penetration of internet easily accessible. For instance, I read a fascinating book by journalist P. Sainath titled The Last Heroes, Foot Soldiers of Indian Freedom, which narrates the stories of individuals who contributed to our freedom struggle in unconventional ways. Let me give you an example. There is a lady who made chapatis for underground revolutionaries. And every day her job was to sneak food from the British soldiers and make sure the revolutionaries get them. There is another story of a lady who delivered secret messages to revolutionaries. And in the end of the book, one of the revolutionaries says that, we were not hit by lathis, but are we not freedom fighters? I feel like if you start telling these stories, people start getting interested that, our struggle has been fought on so many different battles. And the Indian government has done a fascinating job where it has created, on account of the 75 years of independence, the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, they have uploaded many such stories free of cost on a dedicated portal. And you see the portal on the screen right now, which makes history fun and interesting. Rest, I encourage everyone to read the basic structure blog, wherein I will ensure that I make the Constitution interesting for you and leave you with thoughts to wonder. And to conclude, I would like to quote from one of my favorite superheroes, Spider Man, who was told by his uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. And I feel the great responsibility to create better citizens rests on all of us, especially the teachers. And we must ensure that we exercise that responsibility with a lot of dedication and commitment. I think with that, I will rest my speech, and I hope it's been helpful. And I'm really eager to listen to all the questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Swapnil, for taking us through the whole process of how the Constitution was made and the in betweens, right? So it was really a delightful session to hear from you. And it was really great to hear from you. There were some places where I was also being enlightened of some things that I might have studied in during my school days, but I don't remember it now. So yes, it has been a very insightful journey with you here.
No, no, I'm
Thank you
really
so much.
glad.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We also have some teachers who are commenting in in the comment section, that about some things, that how constitution should be made instrumental, and how B.R. Ambedkar has made the constitution what it is today. So, any questions, if any teacher has, I request the teachers here to ask, or any ideas to share, anything at all. The comment section is free for you to share your comments and share your ideas here. Right. If not, then we will quickly move ahead and end the session for today, which is thank you so much, Swapnil, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
It
much for
was
having me.
Thank you so much. For the teachers, there is a bit of information that we also provided to you at the start of the session, which was you will also be getting a participation certificate at the end of the session, but you'll have to fill a form, an attendance form that is going to be shared with you on the comment in the comment section. You can also find the attendance form link on the website, the Gurushala website. And thank you so much for being here with us today. And for any help or assistance, please visit our website, which is www.gurushala.co, and email if you have any questions, any queries. Do email at info@gurushala.co. Thank you so much, teachers, for taking time and attending the session today. And thank you so much, Swapnil, for being here with us
No,
today.
thank you so much. And if I may add, a very, very happy Republic Day
Yeah.
to everyone tomorrow. It's
Yes.
75 years. We must, if nothing, read the preamble tomorrow. to understand how fascinating our Constitution and our history is. So, many, many congratulations for doing this, and a very happy Republic Day to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Swapnil. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.